I didn't plan to fall in love with a colleague. To be honest, I haven't planned anything in my personal life for a long time. Work has neatly replaced my calendar, and every evening it had the same thing: deadline, sync, release. Maybe that's why you fit into my schedule so easily. You just turned out to be another item that constantly popped up next to the tasks. And every time I put a tick next to discuss with you, a second one appeared inside me. Invisible, not for Jira. Watch you smile again and pretend that I don't care. We met in the third week of the project in a conference room with a broken lamp. The light was flickering as if someone was periodically photographing the room. Click, and your face is clear for a split second. Click, again, a shadow, outline, silhouette. You came in after me, were exactly 2 minutes late, and smiled for exactly 2 minutes, apologizing. You said that it was an aesthetic delay so as not to ruin the composition. I remember how my eyebrow twitched from laughter and slight irritation, and how you looked at it as if it was also part of the composition. We had the same headphones, the same mugs from the kitchen. All the others were broken, but these two survived. The same habit of drowning out awkwardness with a joke. It seemed to me that we were not so much talking as carefully, one brick at a time, laying a narrow bridge over something dangerous and deep. And every time a foot stepped on a new brick, there was a rustling sound below. Be careful, boundaries. We have a document about boundaries. More precisely, we have two of them. One from HR. Those same rules: don't meet with people from your team while you're together on a project. And the second is yours. It wasn't printed out, but you formulated it yourself one day in the kitchen between coffee and an army of paper cups. I'm not free, you said, looking out the window as if it wasn't a bread car that was parked in the yard below, but someone's fate, and I'm not the kind of person who keeps two doors open. I nodded, trying not to show that something inside me had suddenly deflated like a balloon from too hot air. From that moment on, I began to learn a new discipline: how to keep your gaze on you for exactly as long as is considered politeness and not recognition, how to laugh a half tone quieter than you want, how to respond in a messenger faster than usual, but a couple of minutes later than your heart requires. The main thing is not to become that person around whom too noticeable. The main goal is not to spoil either other people's boundaries or the project. You have a way of being attentive that seems accidental. You drink tea, not coffee. You said the night before the release, when we were burning through the tests and put a paper cup with the right bag on the table. I didn't have time to ask how you knew. You shrugged. You wince at the smell of espresso, but you smile when the tea is in a clear glass. I felt a tightness inside. I remembered how last week we walked home from the office. The city was already soaked. The signs were reflected on the asphalt, and you walked next to me, not touching, but as if placing your hand between me and all the corners of the world. We talked about stupid things, about the music from your playlist, about my dislike of early meetings, about the fact that if cats designed offices, they would have more sunspots. Is it a coincidence? I asked myself later, lying in a dark room, looking at the phone screen where our chat was burning. Your short messages, my long silence, your stickers with lazy cats, my checklists, which for some reason included your nickname. Do you know what this looks like from the outside? I asked myself again when I caught myself adjusting my step to yours, repeating the same words as you, a couple of seconds later. Sometimes it seemed like we were working in a pair of dancers who were forbidden to dance in public, and we were practicing steps while no one was watching. I started writing letters, not to you, but to myself. In notes, at night, at first just lines, then paragraphs, once almost a whole page. I didn't send them, of course they were letters in bottles that I hid on the top shelf of the closet, both from myself and from you. Yes, I have feelings for you, I typed, and I don't know what to do with it. I understand our circumstances, and I hate this childish desire in myself to forget about them for at least an hour. Sometimes I could almost hear your voice in my head, even a little ironic, the one with which you explain difficult things. We are adults, we can keep our distance. And I nodded to this voice while my fingers typed something completely different. External life went on as if nothing was happening. Brief on Monday, demo on Thursday, other people's laughter in the smoking room, your hand on the back of the chair next to you when we were discussing a bug that stubbornly wouldn't reproduce. Sometimes it seemed like our conversation was always double. What we said out loud, look, if we put this in a separate service, and what we didn't say, if only it were possible to take me out of you so that neither you nor I would be hurt. One morning I caught myself memorizing your little habits, like a collector memorizes the numbers of rare stamps. You fidget with the corner of your notebook when you're nervous. You never say, let's do it later. Always, let's do it this day, but later. You look into the eyes when you apologize, and at the table when you think. The strangest thing is that our silence also had a geography. In the elevator, it was as thick as glass. People around, mirrors, a back that you could see but not touch. In the conference room, it was as soft as carpet. You could step more carefully. In the corridor, it was embarrassed. It contracted when someone walked by. But on the street, at night, when we were the last to leave, it, on the contrary, expanded, and there was freedom in it. The kind that is frightening because it resembles the real thing. Once I finally saved one of the letters, not just in notes, but in a file. Funny, I named it like a task, draft for future, as if it were a new module and not my heart. Neatly packed in a zip, I hid it on my desktop in the temporary folder. I felt like a teenager who hides a diary under the mattress, although she knows no one is looking, no one cares. Not HR with its wording, not our project, not the city outside the window, which turns blue every morning by 8. You seem to notice nothing, or you noticed too much and chose not to notice. Anopnos, sometimes it seemed to me that you deliberately turned up the volume. You spoke warmer than necessary and then cooled down, and it seemed like an attempt to return both of us to normal temperature. Sometimes that you simply do not know how to do it any other way. To be polite for you is to be attentive. To be attentive means to give too much, and then I was angry not at you, but at myself. Stop reading the signs where there are signs about evacuation. But one night did happen. The one when our knots slipped. We stayed late in the office together. The others left after 10, and the logs were still beating on our test stand. You took off your jacket, rolled up your sleeves, and the line on your wrist, a thin, whitish scar, became visible. I fell off my bike when I was a kid, you said, as if you heard my silent, "What is this?" We laughed when another test failed and were silent when it did, as if victories were more dangerous than failures. When everything finally came together, it was already past midnight. We walked down the empty stairs where each step echoed 2 flights up. At the entrance, you stopped and looked at me in a way you had never looked at me before. Too directly. You know, you said quietly, sometimes it seems that you and fell silent. I felt my hands shaking slightly. Don't continue, I asked. Please? You nodded and smiled, the way people smile when they realize that they are saving each other. From words, we went out. The air was wet, the city was dark, and because of this, it seemed that we were floating on something quiet. At home, I opened my laptop and pulled out my draft for future. Yes, I wrote, I have feelings for you, and this isn't drama or romance. It's just what it is. I don't want a relationship. Not with you, not now, not with anyone. We both know why. But I'd like to spend time with you safely, without violations, without hints of what we can't afford. I reread it, closed the file, hid it back in temporary, turned off the light. A minute later, the phone vibrated quietly on the nightstand. From you? Are you awake? Let's talk tomorrow after the stand up. There's something important. I stared at the screen for a long time, listening to that rustling sound in my chest. Be careful, boarders. And suddenly I remembered. I left a stack of sheets of paper on the printer in the conference room, on one of which, I think, on the back of the flight checklist, was written in my handwriting, "Yes, I have feelings for you." I wasn't sure if someone took them, but you wrote, "Important. In the morning, I'll find out what exactly." The morning was too bright, as if someone had turned the saturation of reality down. I came earlier than usual, not because I had to, but because I couldn't breathe at home. The coffee machine was making noise in the empty kitchen, and even its sound seemed like condemnation. The first thing I did was go to the printer. The tray was empty. Someone had already taken the sheets of paper with the diagrams. On the table next to me was one forgotten paperclip and a strip of blue paper with the words "Printing complete." I stood and looked at this scrap as if I could read traces of my words on it. At the stand-up, you were ordinary, a little tired but collected, with the usual short blockers, with a joke about how tasks are like cats. If they don't move, you have to lure them. I laughed in the right places and kept my back straight. 10 people, 15 minutes, standing in a semicircle, early birds from neighboring departments scurrying behind the glass. At some point, you looked at me, not for long, just noting my presence, and nodded barely noticeably. After, I nodded in response. There was a rustling inside. We chose a conference room without windows, the one where the lamp sometimes flickers. You closed the door but didn't sit down, instead walking around the table and leaning your palms on the edge. On the tabletop, neatly, like someone returning a found document, lay a sheet of paper folded in half. I recognized the paper even before you turned it over. The edge with microfraying, the trace of my marker, a thin diagonal crease. "I think this is yours," you said calmly. I took the general package from the printer and noticed on the back. You fell silent, not looking for words. I noticed a text that is not for everyone. I sat down. The lamp above us clicked and became steady. The sound of water running from a cooler could be heard somewhere in the corridor. I wanted to throw it away, I answered honestly, or hide it better, or not print it at all. You sat down opposite and placed your palm on the sheet of paper without touching the letters, like a doctor who knows that the pain is under the skin, not in the wound. "I thought I should ask you before I make any conclusions. I don't want to guess, and I don't want to make you uncomfortable." You smiled slightly but without ease. "Paradox. Any option is discomfort." "Any," I agreed, "except maybe one. We pretend nothing happened and just be more careful. Two professionals who have feelings that lead nowhere." "Which have boundaries," you added, "and responsibility. Before the project. And before the people who are counting on us." The word "people" fell between us like a heavy drop. You said it not as an abstraction, and I nodded, because I knew there is your house, someone's cups on the kitchen shelf, a bag with someone's brush, loose hair on the pillow. I didn't ask for details and never intended to. The simple fact that you are not alone was enough for me not to encroach on it. "I feel bad that you read it," I said, "but it's probably more honest that you did. At least we won't have this game of interpretation. I don't want you to think that this is manipulation, or that I'm expecting something." "I don't think so," you said quietly. To be completely honest, I also sometimes behave in such a way that you can hope for this. And it's wrong. I didn't mean to, but I don't know how to turn off caring when it asks to come out. And I don't know how to be completely cold." "No need to be cold." I shook my head. "I don't need ice. I need clarity, so that I know where the wall is and don't hit my temple." You smiled. For the first time that morning, I felt myself letting go a little. We talked through the rules, like children who build houses out of pillows and agree on where you can't step. "Don't text after 10 unless it's urgent. Don't stay together at night. If there's a task hanging, ask someone else to stay. No personal jokes that only we understand. If we feel drawn, say it out loud without dramatization, like about fatigue or a migraine. It's temporary," you suddenly added. "I've already asked to move to a neighboring project after the release. They need someone with my stack, and it won't be a conflict of interest. I didn't want to talk ahead of time, but it seems like now is the time. Not because I'm running away, because this way." You searched for the word. "It's more correct. For everyone." My chest tightened as if I had a cold. It would have been easier to be offended. "You're leaving the team because of me. That's all your attention." But it was unfair to be offended. This news was both a relief and a loss, as if a window had been opened in the room. It was fresh, but you could immediately hear the wind outside. "Will you tell me when it's confirmed?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. "I'll tell you." You nodded. "And if you want, I can take this sheet to the shredder right now." I looked at the paper, at my unsent bottle mail. My fingers were shaking a little, but I picked up the sheet, folded it again in four, like children's secrets, and put it in my notebook. "Yes, I can do it myself." The next few days were very attentive. The world turned up the volume a little, and suddenly I could hear everything. The clicks of the autocomplete carousel, the footsteps at the end of the hallway, the rustle of your sleeve on the table when you reached for the keyboard. We followed the rules. Not because we were afraid that someone would see, because we respected each other within these boundaries. It became easier to breathe, but a different kind of heaviness appeared, like after running. Your legs obey, but inside there is a pulsating warmth, reminding you of the distance between "I want" and "I can." Sometimes I caught my colleagues looking at me. Ordinary, not inquisitive, but it seemed to me they noticed. At the coffee point, Rita asked, "Why are you so collected?" And I almost laughed. Collected is when you walk along the edge of the cup and don't fall. "Nothing, I just want to close 2 tasks before retro," I answered and took a sip of too hot tea. In the evenings I wrote again. But now, not letters about what not to do, but lists of what helps. They contain strange things. Don't watch him tie a scarf. Leave the kitchen if there are only two of you left. Remember that choice is also an action. It sounded like evacuation instructions. But it saved me. And then came a letter from HR Nothing Dramatic. Subject: short conversation, engagement policy. Inside: will take 10 to 15 minutes. Standard check-in as part of updating the corporate code. We'll schedule it for 5 p.m. today, if convenient. My heart sank as if I was standing on an escalator that suddenly turned into stairs. At the meeting, the office smelled, either from fresh plastic or from the wet wipes used to wipe the tables. Anna from HR smiled too professionally and offered water. I refused. On her desk lay a transparent folder with some printouts. At some point, she brought the speech to a neat turn. An anonymous signal was received about a possible crossing of personal boundaries within the team. We do not assume that this is so. She raised her palm. We simply have to check. Is everyone comfortable? Does anyone need support? Do not initiate a transfer if there is a request. I will not ask for details. It is important for me to understand. Do you feel safe? Is no one creating inconvenience for you? Do you need anything? The anonymous signal went through my skin like needles. I nodded, trying to keep my voice simple. I feel safe and I don't have a request. To be honest, we have a good working relationship in our team, and we were just talking about boundaries so that everyone would be correct. I didn't initiate the translation. Okay, Anna nodded and wrote something down. Then I'll record it. No requests, the situation is stable. But the door is always open. On the way out, I lingered by the glass wall. Behind it was a corridor where people were already gathering for 6 o'clock in the evening. A notification flashed on the calendar panel. Another one. Anna HR 1720 1-1. And in the invitees field, I saw a familiar last name, yours. I suddenly realized that I was holding my breath. My throat became dry, and at that moment a short message from you arrived in the messenger. I have HR in 3 minutes. Everything is okay, I'll write later. I stood in the hallway with a plastic cup of water, which I had taken on the way out, and thought about how I would have to cross another small bridge, only this time I would step across it alone. The office door clicked and Anna called the next one. I saw you walking towards me, evenly, like in a stand-up comedy with the same short-on blockers in your gait. And when you were already close, you leaned over a little and whispered, "If they ask about the translation," I confirmed it. You went inside, and I was left with the water, in which the lamp suddenly reflected, and I thought, wasn't it too late to come up with the rules, if my calendar already has a blank space instead of your name after the release? I thought that after the talks and the rules, it would become easier. For a while, it was like that, as if we had aired out the room and the smell of tension dissolved in the draft. But in its place, another one appeared. Not sharp, but persistent, like perfume on someone else's scarf. You are no longer nearby, but there is a trace. And the closer the release was, the more clearly I heard this trace. The team lived at the pace of the final week. Short statuses, long lists, endless little approvals that merged into one string of yes, yes, let's do it. Funny memes about ship it and the cats dragged the sprint were going around the chat. By the evening, the stacks of sheets of paper were growing again at the printer, which no one had time to sort through. I caught myself avoiding empty spaces. I went into the kitchen only if someone was already there, closed the tab with our dialogue as soon as I finished a working phrase. You did the same. You appeared and disappeared with the precision of a metronome. In jokes, you were a little drier than usual. In letters, 2 words shorter. We turned our common sound to a quiet mode so as not to disturb anyone. And suddenly, from this quiet, it became audible how strong it was. The anonymous signal Anna had mentioned seemed to jump under the carpet. The corridors went quiet for a second, as happens when someone mentions someone else's name. I caught a few overly attentive glances, the ones that seemed to be about the weather, but the question in them was about people. Rita once stopped next to the window and said, "Listen, is everything okay? If necessary, I'll cover any meeting." I grinned. "Everything's okay. Thank you." She nodded as people nod when they believe half of something. The rest is left for the world to figure out. On the eve of the release, we gathered for a general run-through. You walked us through the checklist in a voice that always makes my heart rate drop. Each item is like a step down a ladder to a safe basement. We sat in a large conference room, some on chairs, some on the windowsill. On the whiteboard are arrows, arrows, arrows. Your palm, drawing a line from one service to another, is calm, precise. There's a risk here. you said, but we put a swear word in there. I thought, if only in life it were possible to put a swear word in there the same way as in architecture. We followed the rule of not staying together at night almost pedantically. When the chat would say, I'll stay until 10, if anything happens, ping me, we would add, Vova, Psiana, to make it clear. We are not a couple of dancers after a rehearsal. But on the night of the release, as always happens, reality winked. Vova was taken away for an urgent family matter. Yana went to deliver test data for a neighboring team, and one of our metrics graphs suddenly sagged. The arrow dropped by half a division and stretched the shadow. I don't want to break our agreements, you said quietly, looking at the monitor as if you were asking permission not from me, but from the green and yellow rectangles. But this needs to be completed. Let's call the person on duty from the neighbors. Let him just sit in the chat. Formally, we are not alone. We called the duty officer, Seryoja, from the platform, answered with a humane, here, put I in reactions, and disappeared into the depths of his alerts. In fact, there were two of us. The legal observer existed, but in the room there was only our breath, monitors, coffee, and the night behind the glass. Working at night makes people more open than they planned. Not because they want to talk, because their strength goes into the work, and the masks that hold things as they should be begin to slip on their own. We sat next to each other, a little further than usual so as not to bump elbows. You spoke the steps, as if you were explaining them to a third party. We're deploying now. We're looking at the lags. If anything, we'll roll back. I repeated after him, like an echo so as not to drown in the silence between phrases. On deploying, the arrow twitched. On looking it leveled out. On, if anything, there was a pause. Do you believe that things become easier when you name them? You asked suddenly, without taking your eyes off the logs. It depends on the thing, I answered. Sometimes a name is a lock. Sometimes a key, Gunnar, you said. Sometimes an exit sign. And sometimes it's no entry. I chuckled. We didn't look at each other. It was like we were talking to one wall for two. It's easiest to speak honestly when you're half a turn away from someone else's face. Alert verse. The metrics became even like the drawings in a textbook. You quietly exhaled, that same short exhalation that I have learned to recognize from any side of the table over the past months. We sat for another minute, like people sitting on the edge of a pool after a swim. The water no longer hits the side, but the heart continues to beat. I'll switch right after the release, you finally said. They confirmed. They're already having a stand-up on Monday. Today is my last evening in this conference room. So this is the last night we need rules, I said. From now on, they'll just have to keep their distance. The distance is sometimes wrong, you chuckled. The city is small. The teams go to the same cafeterias, but yes, it will become easier. I nodded. You always want to believe about easier. Even when you know that easier doesn't mean it hurts less, but it's clearer why it hurts. We turned off the monitors and went out into the empty corridor. The night outside was damp. The glass of the doors was covered with a thin fog, like glasses in a mask. In the elevator, the mirror returned to us two people who carefully kept their distance. I suddenly noticed, on your wrist, a thin white strip of scar looks paler in the cold light, like a path that snow leaves on iron. You noticed my gaze, smiled barely. I looked away. At the entrance you stopped, like that time, but now there was no phrase that needed to be interrupted. There was thank you, familiar, work-related, and take care of yourself. Very human. I nodded both times. We went our separate ways, like the hands on a clock which have their own geometry of meeting. Morning brought the letter, release done. The chat erupted in emoji fireworks. An invitation popped up on the calendar, mini release. Celebration, kitchen, 6 p.m. I was going to not go, to be honest. Not out of pride, out of protection, not to be where it's easy to say something unnecessary. But then I thought about the team. They deserved to have me there. And I went. The kitchen smelled of pizza and plastic plates. Someone brought a homemade pie. You stood by the wall, and on your face was that smile that you put on when many people are looking at you. Open, neat. The team leader made a toast about the level of maturity, delivered on time. Thank you, everyone, especially to you. He turned to you for holding architecture like a backbone. Someone clapped. Sorry, I clapped too. At some point, our eyes met. You slightly lifted the plastic cup. I did the same. I brought you a small package, a transparent glass mug, the one in which the tea is visible like a watercolor. On a small piece of paper, I wrote, "For the transparent, thank you." No signature, no dates. You looked inside, smiled with the corner of your lips, hid it in your backpack. Didn't say anything, and rightly so. You, in turn, handed me a thin envelope on the way out. "Later," you said. Inside was a printout, a sheet with the heading "Rules," with our points. At the bottom, a short line in your handwriting, "Thank you for holding me when I was swaying." I sat at my desk and read this sheet like one reads instructions for a complex thing, understanding that there are no emotions in it, but it is written for emotions. When the office started to thin out, I noticed how the heart became very noticeable. It drowned out both the air conditioner and the seal of the neighboring department. A message from you came to the messenger. "I'm leaving now. Don't see me off. See you later." I typed "okay," but erased it, and wrote, "May the road be easy." You typed "heart" for the first time ever and left. At home, I opened my laptop and did what I did at the beginning. The file, "draft for future." But instead of long paragraphs, I wrote shortly, "I still think about you a little more than I should. I still don't want a relationship, and I still want us to be safe. And I still think that sometimes the only way to keep a good thing is to let it go." In time. Then I clicked "save as" and named the file differently. "Let go." Funny and too accurate at the same time. The night was quiet. At 2 o'clock, the phone screen blinked. From you. "I still want to ask you for one thing. Tomorrow, 10 o'clock, the park by the bridge. It's not about breaking, it's about saying goodbye normally if you're okay." It took me 3 minutes to type "yes," and another 10 to not change my mind and press "send." Sleep came in fits and starts. I woke up, looked at my phone, made sure the message hadn't disappeared, and fell back into the gray water. In the morning, the air was clear. It only happens on rare key of days after a night of rain, when you can see a tree on the embankment down to the vein on the leaf. I approached the park ahead of time. On the bench by the water, there were two paper cups. In one, tea, in the other, also tea. You sat, putting your palm on the lid of yours, and looked at the bridge as one looks at the line that is about to be crossed. I inhaled as if before diving and sat down next to you, leaving a palm of space between us, exactly our norm. "I thought," you said after a moment, "that we don't have a normal ending. There were rules, there were conversations, there were avoidances, there were no—" You searched for the word "dots." "I want a period too," I said, "not an ellipsis." You nodded. The tree above us was dropping a few drops. A dog was barking in the distance. You turned to me, fully, for the first time in a long time, and said, "Then let's put it on today. But before that, I need to tell you one thing that I've never said out loud to you. I was reaching out to you," you said. "Not like people reach out in novels, and not like people reach out into the abyss, but like people reach out for warmth when their hands are frozen. I tried to call it caring for the team, professional attentiveness, and that's my character. But those were just door signs, and the door led there too." A small, stubborn smile twitched across my face. "I knew," I answered, "or guessed, and that made it more difficult and easier." You nodded. "I asked for a translation not because I was afraid of what they'll say," you said. "I asked for it so that I wouldn't become the person who one day turns around and sees ruins around him and in his hands a couple of beautiful words about 'that's how it happened.' I have a house, obligations, decisions made not only by me. And the strangest thing is that this doesn't change the fact that I love our conversations, our quick blockers, your tea, and your habit of folding a sheet of paper in half when you're scared." I looked at the water. Long glares ran across the surface like lines in a document that had been worked on for a long time. "I don't want to be a ruin in anyone's story," I said, "even in my own." We fell silent. The silence was not empty but clear, like a screen where only the cursor blinks. It doesn't rush. It just reminds. Time is passing. "I also have one truth that I kept behind my teeth," I said, "even when I was writing my draft for the future. I sometimes imagined that all the ifs would disappear. If it weren't for the rules, if it weren't for the people, if it weren't for the team. And every time I felt cold, because it wasn't just the ifs that were disappearing, but us too. Not those who sit here, but we who know how to do without the unnecessary. I'm afraid of losing exactly that." You looked at me too closely. That's how people look when they're afraid to scare me off, but want to remember it's not a small thing to not lose the best, you said. We sat for a while longer, slowly finishing our tea. The paper lids clicked softly when you pressed them with your thumb. Above us, the tree dropped drops, rare as final arguments. Let's agree on a ritual, you suggested, so that this point has a sound. Which? You took a sheet of paper folded in four out of your backpack. I recognized it right away. Our document. Rules. At the bottom, you added another line. 7. If it becomes too much, let it go with gratitude. Next to it, a small check mark. Let's run our eyes again? You asked. We read each point out loud, like two sides of the same contract. Don't text when it's too late. Don't be alone. Talk when you feel like it. Trust each other with what we don't say. And let go. Then you folded the sheet diagonally like paper airplanes I helped fold the edge. The paper hummed under your fingers, thin and serious. We stood up and together threw our airplane into the water. It didn't fly, it landed on the surface and floated, turning into a wet spot. And I suddenly felt relief, so simple that I wanted to laugh. Now that's definitely the point, you said. Now, yes, I agreed. We walked around the park. You told me about a new project without names but with lines of connections as you can. I listened and caught myself thinking that I was happy that you would have an interesting load, new ribs in architecture, new people. It was a pure feeling without impurities. We reached the bridge, lingered at the railings. The tram rang below, and this sound worked like a bell for the end of the class. Can I ask for one last thing? You asked. About which one? Without hugs, not because it's impossible, because it's not necessary, I want the last thing I remember to be not about almost, but about definitely. We are close. We say goodbye and we are not ashamed of it. I agree, I said. A handshake? You laughed, and we shook hands, politely, firmly, like partners who have done a difficult job. At that moment, I noticed for the first time that your palm was warmer than mine, and that warmth does not always need to be continued. We went our separate ways on the bridge. I walked and felt how boxes were slowly being moved inside me. For later, for never, for today. In the for today box were tea, clean air, and a thought with a simple outline. I did the right thing. In for later was an emptiness into which something else would need to be put. In for never were all those ifs that we had not chosen. The following weeks were like a neatly marked grid. Your avatar at the stand up was replaced by a gray off channel. Letters arrived without your nickname in the copy. One day I saw you in the cafeteria. You were standing in line for soup and arguing with the cook about whether it is possible to undercook garlic. We nodded to each other and went about our business. Another time we crossed paths at the turnstiles. You were holding the door for a man with a pack of paper. I said, "Thank you." He said, "Thank you." You said nothing, just smiled, and that was enough. HR sent a dry, "Thank you for your understanding and cooperation." Several new voices appeared in the Cats Dragged the Sprint chat, where our project became quieter, not because the engine died, but because the volume was adjusted differently. I suddenly noticed that between a joke and a deed, I had less trembling inside, as if the body stopped holding muscles in constant tension. One evening, as before, I opened my file. Not draft for future, not let go. New, I called it short, truth, and began to write down not thoughts about us, but observations about myself. 1. I know how to become attached to people without destroying either myself or them. 2. My feelings are not a request for action, but a fact that can be given a place. 3. I am not obliged to go to the impossible to prove that I feel the present for. Sometimes maturity is not cold, but warmth at a distance. I wrote and remembered a glass mug. At home, I put it on a shelf near the window, and every morning the tea in it became a yellow rectangle of light. Transparency suddenly ceased to be a synonym for no way. It became the word honestly. The environment was also being restructured. Rita once said, "It's like you've straightened up." I shrugged. Probably. You've stopped talking too much. The team leader at the Retro noted, "Team communication has become calmer." Someone jokingly exclaimed, "Because the release has passed," and everyone laughed. I smiled, thinking that the reason, of course, is broader, but chatting about the heart at the Retro is a strange practice. Once you wrote nothing forbidden, congratulated the team on a small victory that you saw in the general channel. Well done. You can see the hand, I answered on behalf of the whole group, formally And everything would have ended there if a minute later I hadn't caught myself on the fact that my heart was beating a little faster. I put my palm on the table just to feel the hard wooden edge and said to myself out loud, "This is normal." The pulse leveled out. A month later, a general meetup for companies popped up on the calendar. You were invited to give a talk on architectural approaches. I sat in the middle of the room so as not to sit too close or too far. You spoke calmly, like back then, during the rehearsals, not selling, not lowering, just holding the line. The questions were smart. I asked one about swearing under risk. You answered, looking at the room, not catching faces. After the talk, we bumped into each other in the aisle. "Good question," you said. "Good talk," I answered. We passed by, and I didn't want to look back. In the evening, I couldn't fall asleep for a long time, not because I was overwhelmed, because I felt a rare clarity. History has its tales, but it also has a period. You were no longer the hero of my everyday life. You became part of my language, like a word that you find once and never lose again. It is rarely needed, but it is nice to know that you have it. On the weekend, I went to the same park without a meeting, without an invitation, sat on the same bench. The water was different, heavier. Like before the rain, I took a notebook out of my bag and found that envelope with your printout of the rules. I looked at the scribbles at the bottom. "Thank you for holding me when I was rocking." I smiled, truly, without bitterness, not for memory but for myself today, and tore the sheet into strips, not out of anger, but for a new mezzanine. The strips rustled like dry grass. I threw them in the trash can and stood watching as the wind pulled a couple of papers out of it and drove them along the path one. Scrap stuck to my shoe, and I bent down to take it off. Only one syllable was visible on the scrap. Tup, and I laughed. It resembled the word path. At home, I brewed tea in a glass mug and took a box with a sticker for later out of the cupboard. I held it in my hands for a long time, like you hold presents that you haven't decided to unwrap yet. Then I put it away again. Later is not about running away. It's about the fact that there will be room in my life for something more than absence. But not today, not because it hurts, but because it's calm. I opened my laptop and reviewed my notes. At the end of the file Pravda, I added one more point. 5. Don't confuse depth with drama. Depth is when you stand on the shore and see the bottom, even if it's far away. Drama is when you shout, "Help," although you know how to swim. And I put a period. The simplest and most honest of all. The phone on the table blinked. A new message in the general chat. "Who's going to volunteer tree planting tomorrow?" I was about to scroll but stopped. "I am," I wrote, and a minute later I added, "I can take a thermos of tea." A week later, in the park near the same bridge, the guys and I were planting small seedlings in the ground. The earth smelled of wet iron in the future. I was pouring tea from my thermos into paper cups, and steam rose from them in even columns. The newcomers were laughing. Some were cursing at the dirt. Some were telling me how to straighten the roots correctly. I was looking at the thin branches and thinking that I would come here and watch them grow. No promises, no drama, no ifs. Just they grow. You didn't come that day, and it was right. In this "didn't come" was our new honesty and my new thank you. I drank my tea, straightened up, and felt how my chest became as transparent as in that mug. The world stopped being quiet from the unspoken, but became quiet from the sufficient. I closed the thermos, threw away the empty glass, and walked along the path to the exit. And maybe most importantly, I didn't look back.